this is an attempt to reflect on our experiences about immigrants in media. This is not rehearsed, as you know, and yeah, tentatively calling this FAQ, Immigrants in Media, because it's a topic that most people don't discuss, but everybody wants to know. Well, maybe except politicians, they do speak a lot about immigrants, which is not very helpful. Anyway, so yeah, we can take 2 minutes each, or longer, to talk about what makes us qualified to talk about this. Do you want to go?
I can go, yeah. So I guess most people seeing this won't necessarily know us, so we might introduce ourselves. I'm Martin, and ladies first, this is Bhavani, and I'm Martin, and we are immigrants.
I don't know if you're an immigrant.
I'm an expat. I'm from Germany and Bhavani is from India, and we have both been living in the UK for 10 and 7 years.
I'm 11 now, because it's
11.
2021.
Yeah, and so I wouldn't have thought that I would make all of these experiences with the Home Office that we did make in the past few years, but we made them, and I guess parts of what happened in the past 3 years brings us here now. Essentially, Bhavani has a chronic illness. Many chronic illnesses. I have one too, so that's something that we share. It's good fun to share those kinds of diseases. She has Crohn's disease, amongst other things, and that has forced her, especially in the past few years, to undergo many surgeries, which in and of itself brought with it a fair few immigration problems. Because as we know, the great British public wants their National Health Service, it prefers it national and not so much immigrational, let's say.
Despite immigration paying literally billions more than its own people. But
I'm sure we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So basically what happened was that Bhavani was in hospital for several months on ICU, parts of this in a coma, and while she was in a coma, we got a letter from the Home Office replying after more than 1 year since applying for a new visa that Bhavani's visa was rejected for reasons that are not necessarily rational or humanitarian or anything. But I guess the most unfortunate thing for us, or Bhavani, or both of us, was that she couldn't really respond to that because she was in a coma. She couldn't really leave the country or even like try to go into review into that decision because she was literally in a coma. And so what ensued was me kind of going a little bit crazy and putting in a new application while she was in a coma, which then a few months later was also rejected, again for, let's say, reasons.
Well, the reasons being that I may not be able to live a healthy life, which still implies that I can't do things as normal, but that I will not die immediately if I left the UK and didn't have access to drugs, I guess.
Yeah, the Home Office acknowledged that she wouldn't have access to the life-saving medication that she needs in India, but the Home Office also was of the opinion that that wasn't their problem, essentially. So which is why we ended up kind of liaising with the media to kind of get a different kind of leverage, and I guess that's what we are going to talk about now in a bit more detail. So do you want to put your version of that intro, or will you be happy with my summary?
Yeah, I think I'm happy with your summary. I was just thinking if there's anything I would add that you haven't already covered. I think I find their letters very humorous in a devastating way, of them saying, oh, India has several alternate therapies you could explore, or oh God, I'm forgetting them now, I need to revisit them, or multiple such reasons that they gave which simply didn't make sense.
I think it was mostly about alternative therapies, which may or may not include yoga and other kind of what British people may think are Indian kind of remedies. I don't know, it sounded very ambiguous in their letter. Clearly they didn't spend any time even researching it.
Yeah, which if they'd looked into it, they would know that those drugs are not available there.
They actually misspelled several of your conditions, which is
kind of
like an indication of how much time the caseworker actually spent with your application.
So I guess I'm happy with your summarizing of that, and I think, I really think they need health-specific caseworkers for things related to human rights and health, since that's a category that they have. They should, anyway.
But maybe you can lead us a bit more directly towards how and, well, I guess the why we kind of explored to some extent, but how we approach the media and how everything even got started. And if that is an avenue that is open to the average immigrant, or if we are kind of the exception.
I mean, I would certainly call us fortunate, because I think, we knew people who could then get us to other people who may know other people, even if directly, you're not in the helpful or whatever group, call it, and your parents who supported it generously through everything. And I think cumulatively we are not your average migrants or immigrant, but I think we may be average in the sense that there are lots of people with such conditions which simply they don't have access to the drugs through which they could live properly, normally, so to speak, if they simply had access to those drugs here. And that's also part of, oh God, how much is it now? Like £600 for every time you renew your visa for national health insurance that you pay on top of the national insurance. So that's why to me it doesn't really make sense, the whole argument about immigrants sponging the government sort of thing. But anyway, I go further. I think I have less experience of when I was in a coma and you had to apply for things. But I think we got discharged. I got discharged in December 4th or something, and it was a letter sent on December 4th that arrived to us on the 7th or 9th, I forget now, which said, oh, we have reviewed your new materials, which was about, well, I'm in a coma and I've had 6 surgeries and I'm awaiting more surgeries. I have a feeding tube and my stomach is partially closed. It needs to be fully closed. And them saying, well, we reviewed this. We don't think you gave us anything more critical to say that you should be allowed to stay here. Which, I think it was at that point, I started playing with the idea of talking to the press and having random informal, I don't know, like venting or complaining to friends and stuff, and we were speaking. Is that even legal for them to say that? And sure, you could find legal loopholes, such as they don't have to make any exceptions unless you have less than 6 months to live, and deporting you would like dramatically harm you. But that also, did I say something?
No.
That also, yeah, I think that also doesn't mean that what they said would be right to deprive someone of care after they've paid into it for like nearly a decade. But yeah, so it was then that I started having these conversations, but I think it wasn't until April when I went into the hospital and my stomach magically made a hole, which would probably be a separate episode on its own. I mean, I was always fearful, even before the surgery started, saying I don't want to be in intensive care and then get a verdict that isn't positive. So that was my worst nightmare, which happened. And when my stomach started opening up on its own, I think that made me feel even more vulnerable, thinking I do need something. And when I say something, I mean something big that would hold people accountable. Like, sure, you've done everything that you can, but there's only so much any one individual or groups can do. So yeah, I think that was when having these random discussions about, oh, which journalists can I speak to, and randomly looking at it to friends saying, oh, I heard this person knows that person, or what have you. I think it was in April where I said, yes, I definitely want to speak to someone, because I didn't want to once again be in the same situation of you not being able to do anything at that point because I was unable to respond. So yeah, I think it was then one of my friends who said, oh, I found all of these, not all, I think it was like 4 journalists who would want to speak to you. And I reached out to them personally, and out of them, I think only one responded to me in a way that felt like she really understood what it was. And she's like May Bullman from Independent, and she's heavily invested in pure immigration stories and speaking about health injustices and social racial injustices and so on. And yeah, and I think since then it was just an amalgamation of fortunate incidents coming together.
Yeah, so I think it's worth pointing out that at that point we were in the next stage of the Home Office side of the saga, in the judicial review, basically taking the Home Office's verdict, which clearly lacked moral and rational basis. There was no merit in those.
Because then we basically asked them to say, how would I live if I didn't have access to these drugs? And they never said anything about it.
Yeah, so we were in judicial review, we're waiting for the next steps essentially when all of this happened. So I would say, I guess I agree that we were, in some respects, it's a fairly common immigration story with immigrants living in this country for years and decades, paying more into the NHS than an average British citizen would do, only to then fall ill and from one moment to the other being classified as a visitor rather than a person that has their life here, and cast as this kind of leech to society, which is, I guess, unfortunately a common narrative. So I guess that's something that many people will be able to empathize with it, also with the struggles of actually finding a good solicitor, which you should think is much easier than it actually is. There are organizations like the GCWI out there that do help with that, but you have to know these things, and we didn't really do that. Yeah, but I think we were exceptional for your connections, to have friends that know friends that work in journalism. I think most immigrants won't be that fortunate. And another thing is, I think to have the courage to actually go there, to actually go with the media, is something that many immigrants also won't necessarily do unless they're really back to the wall with no further options. Because of course there's a huge risk involved with going to the media, because you go public with your story that is frightening, and you don't know what repercussions you get once your story's out. And I think in our case that went really well, but it could, there were quite scary aspects of it, which I'm sure you'll talk about, but I mean, in total, we were, I think, lucky. At the end of the day, it was a lucky coincidence, I reckon, that the Home Office decided to send the letter out when you were in a coma, because of course that made for a very juicy, sensationalist story that the media is naturally attracted to. At least I think it did help that this was it's a very frightening scenario that everybody can empathize with. That's horrible.
Yeah, but you shouldn't need to be in a life or death situation to get care.
You shouldn't. Yeah, no, you shouldn't be. But with respect to the media, unfortunately, the way the media works is, the more crass the story is, the better. If you would be a 50-year-old person that got their letter when she was just recovering from a surgery, instead of being in a coma and in the end 20s, I think the story could have gone very differently. And if you would have gone out to the media with these sets of circumstances behind you, I'm not sure things would have gone that well. But I guess we can maybe recount a little bit more what happened.
Yeah, I guess. No. I don't think, I mean, we've spoken in general, but not asked you specifically, like, devoid from me, what it was like to have your face slathered on newspapers and
news. I mean, obviously I always knew it was made for the camera. I just didn't think that it would be that way. Like, I mean, I was joking. I don't think I'm necessarily meant for the big spotlight. But it definitely wasn't that great to see my face in newspapers all over the world, because that's literally what happened. Like, the Independent article came out it was the first hit on the website on Sunday evening and Monday morning. That's when it got released.
Yeah, it was on the first page, which is kind of what I mean by fortunate incidents that placed everything together.
Yeah. The reporter, May Bullman, wouldn't have made that, or she couldn't have made the decision. That
she
was
said
the editor.
She never knew where it would go on.
That would have been the editor that would decide that. And so it immediately attracted quite a lot of attraction. Interestingly, not at all in Germany, but very heavily so in India, I think. And also over quite widely in Europe. I mean, there were then the Russian television got a lawyer to talk about Bhavani's case, and that got translated into Spanish as well. So there was quite a lot going on, and it was always the same picture, basically lifted either from Facebook and Twitter from you or from the Independent article. So it was usually Bhavani lying there and me and my face something like this. Not necessarily super great to see that everywhere. I think I found it, I mean, obviously at that point I didn't really mind that much, but I mean in the aftermath I think I found it somewhat worrying what that meant for my actual professional career, because I didn't want to be like, if I Google my name, which of course I do never, if I Google my name, then I don't want to just be seen as this guy sitting next to his fiancée in a coma, it's not,
Yeah.
I mean, my ideal dream of my professional career. But I mean, I think that didn't really happen. Of course, you still find these images, but yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was fine. I knew it was a chance that we had to take. So even though I didn't celebrate the exposure, and I could tell from some of my friends as well that they didn't know what to do with that either. They weren't also super excited for us in any way. Like it was, I think many people appreciated how weird it was. Not in a good way, but yeah. And then the whole thing starts with, so once the independent article was out, the day after, that was then...
it was the same day.
It was the same day, later the same day. Change.org approached you if we wanted to start a campaign. And so I did that on the way back from work. I was working in Norwich at the time. I wasn't even with you at that point. So Bhavani was in London, I was in Norwich, and I was on the way back from work. I quickly Change.org actually put together a text that they thought would be a good way to advertise.
We edited it because we didn't want it to come off that way.
Yeah, it was just written in a way that is media compatible, which means it's very sensationalist. It's factually very, I guess it's very cavalier with the truth. It was very cavalier with like details of the story. And it was very much like, if you know these Change.org campaigns, you know how they sound. They are very much pleading and desperate, and that's not really my style, and it's also not really your style. So I remember sitting at a lake on the way home. I sat down, got my laptop out, and basically worked through it to make it sound more like me. And it was still not very comfortable for me, because it was still some sort of desperation in there that was there obviously, but it's still not, I don't like to write that way. But I also knew that it needed to a little bit be like that in order to like get the attention, I guess. Yeah, and so I think we put it online on Monday night at 7 or so. Something like this. And by the time I went to bed, there were like 60 signatures or something. And it was mostly from my work bubble, because I shared it on Twitter, that it got some traction. And I remember walking to work the next day with my colleagues saying, it would be really amazing if you would have 1,000 signatures at the day. That would be all I wish for. And I think by the end of the day, it was more like 60,000 on Tuesday signatures. And again, I think the reason why it took off so much, the Change.org campaign, was that it was such an extreme set of circumstances, like that tiny little brown woman lying in a coma and getting a letter from the Home Office. It's like written for soap opera. And I think that's why people were into it, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it's written for soap opera, but I laugh not because I think it was funny, but because I'm sure it happens still every day. Like, of course it's written for, it sounds so dramatic and insane.
I mean, it was insane.
Yeah. It's hard for, I don't know, I guess for white people with red or blue passports to imagine this, because you have access to countries and places that most others don't. But I think, we know that it happens on a daily basis. Like, we found out through the process, which was also one of the strange repercussions, because I remember every journalist I spoke to for every interview for TV or paper was very surprised, because they were like, "Are you sure you want to be there with your face, with your name? Like, is that fine?" Because it wasn't normal to have someone with a health and immigration issue in the media, because people were just too afraid and would rather give up rather than rather than fight for what they believe is.
Well, fight for their life.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's the thing. For me, it was either live or die slowly. Well, not less than 6 months, but die. Yeah.
So quick enough.
Yeah. Yeah, so it wasn't really an option because people normally just ask, oh, like, when was it an option or at what time? So.
And I guess we've seen later on that, like, you have experienced or we have experienced the things that can happen. Like, we've experienced the good things with the Change Org campaign, and then with our MP getting involved and putting pressure in the House of Commons for Bhavani as well. Like, these were all great things, without which I'm not sure the Home Office would have budged if there wouldn't have been 170,000 signatures at the end of the week. And if
I mean, there are lots of people with lots of news coverage of their, like, really devastating stories.
Yeah.
You simply don't get anywhere. But there are also people like that BBC program with that guy from Bangladesh who, I know he had IBD, Crohn's or colitis, I forget now, who is the exact same case except wasn't in a coma, him, where he was in a TV program and got given like a 5-year visa, after which he could turn it into indefinite leave to remain. And I was like watching it going, what? Like, I also went into a coma and had 6 surgery. Damn it, like,
yeah.
I
mean,
deserve it.
It's not a competition.
I know, but I mean, that's kind of how it's...
It is like playing the lottery, basically, going to the media, because, like, I think all things considered, we ended up quite on top of everything, by chance.
I would say so, yeah.
But we've had episodes where we got the extreme downsides of having the media coverage, and that's something that I think that's the reason why people are hesitating to come forward. Because often you don't get the upsides, but you only get the downsides, which maybe you can talk about.
Yeah, I guess one of the biggest downsides, besides random strangers calling you names on the internet and calling me a racist, real story, and random Indian people yelling at you, which we can get to. I think one of the biggest impediments, and the bit that people most worry about, was the overseas visitor manager from the NHS Trust, where one of the hospitals, because I was in different hospitals every time a hospital gave up on me, I went to different hospitals. One of them rang me up randomly and said, oh, I've come across your case and I think you may like not be liable to the 6 surgery. No, the 5 at the time, 6.
It was 6 at the time.
Okay, yeah, and then it was 7, okay. So but for the 6th surgery you had, could you like come in for an interview? And then we walk into an interview and she says things in an attempt to scare us, apparently. I think this was when you were more terrified compared to me. Like, I was terrified with the Home Office bit. But when this random woman rings me up to say I would be liable to pay for care or not get my, close up my stomach, my 7th surgery for it, I think that's when you were more worried. I was more angry because that was definitive proof that the Home Office directly worked
with the
NHS as making them as guards for kicking out people when the NHS is a space of getting care and a neutral ground.
Maybe it's just worth explaining what you mean when you say close your stomach. It's not like she walked around with an open stomach, like kind of, but...
Well, there was a hole.
Yeah, but it was a tiny
inside.
hole.
Yeah.
And, I mean, there was a few rice grains coming out, but it's, I mean, basically her muscles hadn't been closed after the 6 surgeries because she was basically too swollen after all the surgery she'd been through. She looked like 9 months pregnant, so they couldn't basically get her clothes properly, so she was skin clothed only, and they said she needs to wait at least half a year in order to get her clothes. So that's, I think, what you mean when you say close her up. So we were in that period when all of this happened, essentially. So to me, that overseas visitor manager, that's when you get a visitor. Their threat that unless we would pay up, essentially, we wouldn't be able to get any more surgeries was, yeah, I mean, on the one side, it was a very weird, obvious attempt by the Home Office, or directed by the Home Office, to get to you from another angle. After the whole campaign had kicked off, they couldn't just deny you a visa anymore, because there was already so much media attention, but they apparently still thought that's how they could get you. So we pretend that she wasn't eligible, which clearly you were, and try to silence you like this and get you out of the country like this. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, she just lied outright of saying, I asked, okay, so someone has applied for renewing their visa within the time period, and then walks out of the building, gets hit by a bus. Should they seek care? Should they go to A&E or not? And she was like, oh yes, they really must, as long as they know that they may be liable to pay for it. That is simply not the case. The first page of gov.uk website says, until we give you a decision, you're covered.
Yeah.
So she simply couldn't accuse me. I mean, if I wanted to get my surgeries in calm, I would have applied and gone in immediately. I wouldn't have waited a whole year hoping to hear from it. So I wouldn't end up in the exact same situation that I did.
Yeah, I mean, irrespective of what the general circumstances are, in our case, it was just a really blatant attempt to scare us off.
Yeah, but
which worked for me.
Yeah, why?
I don't know.
I mean,
I found that much more threatening. Than
why?
The whole...
Because it was one person directing, saying things that you knew was only coming from a place of power, and that she could get away with it, even if those are not legal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's irrational, I guess. I think it was just the pure, for me, she was like the pure incarnation of evil as like, I'm just doing what the rules tell me, but like there were folders of names whose life she destroyed.
About 400 every week, that's what I mean by, we know there are literally people, what we went through, or people going through literally every single day, except we don't hear about them.
Yeah, and the vast majority of those people probably have lived in the UK for decades,
yeah,
and were unlucky enough to get ill. I think that's a myth to assume that people literally come here to get surgeries. Who would do that? Like, I mean, I guess it happens in very rare cases, but I don't think that's a sensible idea.
There's always an exception.
Yeah.
I mean, this would be equivalent to kicking every British businessman out of any country except UK, saying, hey, if you come in here, you're going to colonize us, get out.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's the same logic they're using.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I think my irrational fear was quite rational, as in, if you project it to the other people's lives that were destroyed, that's where their lives ended, at least. Well, maybe not literally, but their lives in the UK, at least, most of them, I guess.
Well, that would be the same in my case.
It would have been the same,
yeah,
without MPs and change.org and
yeah.
stuff. That's what I mean. That's how my fear is not really that irrational. It might have been irrational in our case, because we had at that point our MP and 170,000 signatures behind us. So, yeah, obviously they didn't really have anything against us anymore. But
I think it pissed me off. I think there was no space for feeling scared in me. Like, I was terrified when I got the call, but when we went to see her and she started saying, oh, we see about 400 people a day through an algorithm that the Home Office sends us, and we go into ICUs and speak to the patients. I was like, I think at that point I was just filled with rage. compared to, because it, like, there's nothing we could say, or like all the questions I asked her to incriminate herself were purely because I knew that she couldn't get to us. I just wanted to see if there was someone who was feeble and timid sat here, how would she react? How far would she go to, like, say the opposite of the simplest rules that everybody knows?
Yeah.
And she did.
Yeah, but for people who weren't lucky enough to basically get the media carousel going like we did, this would have been possibly the only thing that they would have gotten out of their media coverage.
Yeah.
Some overseas visitor catching up with them. Yeah, so that's, I think, the real, and I mean the very real reason why immigrants are scared of going to the media, especially if they have conditions that require them to, that makes them more vulnerable.
Yeah, well, it is. Yeah, it's definitely one of them. But of course, we didn't sit tight. Like the second we got the call, we like told our MP, who wrote to the Home Secretary directly saying, "What the hell's happening?"
Yeah.
Because it kind of made no sense. I forget even if it was Preeti Patel or someone else. But anyway.
At that point, I think it was Preeti Patel. Yeah.
Oh yeah, she was the alternative therapist
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
I would love to have a conversation with her.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, most people wouldn't have had that opportunity to just, I mean, everybody can write to their MP, but not everybody will have their MP actually fight for them.
Yes,
like,
that's true.
like
And
ours did.
yeah, I read like earlier today, probably because I hate myself that I was doing this to myself. I was reading how there have been like, surprisingly, not just Tory or Labour, but equal number of them, of MPs who give up their constituents when they reach out to them for a immigration thing. It's like a date on work permit website, which talks about like where people were targeted from to be, like, you know, unearthed for the Home Office. But yeah, which was, yeah, that got a bit serious. Were there any, oh yeah, I did say we'd talk about this. Were there any, like, if you can think of ridiculous things that happened? Like, I find it ridiculous that people kept accusing me of being a racist during all of this. Because I said, if immigrants are paying in like 3 times as much as locals, then we should get care. And they called me a racist because National Health Service means it's for nationals.
Yeah.
I think that was, I found that particularly funny. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
I mean, I don't think I found the whole thing particularly funny.
I mean, me getting called a racist, is that not funny?
Yeah, it's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, in like inside laughing way for me.
Really?
I mean,
Why?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's funny. I mean, the whole thing wasn't particularly funny.
No, I mean, I think it's like you have to like be a complete idiot to say that. So, I mean, that means you have never picked up a sociology book.
I think that's probably true for the vast majority.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's
that
funny.
doesn't make you an idiot.
Okay.
I mean, I think many people, don't necessarily understand what racism means, but I guess that's also a different topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think I found the whole thing particularly entertaining.
I mean, you gotta take where you can to laugh.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I basically just went into tunnel vision and didn't really read either good or bad comments because it would have been just too much, I think, to process. I did read and respond to the change.org comments the first few days, but then it got just too much because it was just too much. And then I was busy just fighting off some random Indians that wrote me on Facebook saying, you expletive, why don't you just marry her and there's no problems anymore? But I mean, this is kind of, I guess, another thing that as a white European you don't necessarily often think about these things. Like the whole concept of the hostile environment is not something, or maybe now with Brexit, but before that white Europeans wouldn't be exposed to any of these realities. I came to the UK 7 years ago without even having to show my passport, and I just came in with a car full of stuff and opened a bank account, and nobody ever bothered me with anything. The first time I heard about the hostile environment, well, I heard of it like everybody, but the first time I understood what it means is when I was with you and these things happened. And I guess apparently those Indians that write me that I should just marry her and that's it, that's kind of very insulting to a white European, because we know, we get taught from very young ages that we get to do whatever we want to do. So I want to propose to you when I want to propose to you, and not when I need to, because otherwise you will die somewhere in an airplane in a coma. This is not the way Europeans are taught they can live their lives, and that is, I mean, that is a privilege, of course, but to me that I found that really insulting, and it's not a nice life if you have to do things like getting married or make these kinds of decisions that should be decisions out of a good place and not out of a necessity. It's kind of, yeah, it's interesting that apparently Indians don't think that's a problem. That I mean, of course there would be a pragmatic solution, but I guess we wanted to do these things on our own time and not dictated by the Home Office. It just takes away from a quality of life, which apparently is something that immigrants don't deserve, a quality of life.
Yeah.
According to the hostile environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think those Indian men were coming at you with a certain vengeance, I think, and also it's simply false. Just because you get married doesn't mean you get to stay. Like, it's...
Of course, it's not that straightforward.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, that is also an idiotic thing to say, much like calling me a racist.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think what I found most interesting was this kind of pragmatic approach of as if it wouldn't matter if we actually like each other. Like, just marry her. And what's the problem? Yeah. I guess not really funny, but surreal was those lawyers talking about our case on TV was a bit of an out-of-body experience. And
Which
I found
one,
it...
the Russian one?
Yeah, the Russian TV station, but it was in English.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I found it interesting myself to see how quickly I detached from our reality and kind of watched it like someone who watches TV. Like, within a few days of the Change.org campaign, when everything blew up to proportions that are kind of too big to really realize, that's basically what happened. I detached this experience from my own, and it was like watching TV. Yeah.
Do you think you can ever explain that to other white people with your background?
Which part?
No, like, you know, what it's like to, you know, not take for granted of where you can stay or not stay, and healthcare, and just basically having a lack of choices.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible to explain this. I I mean, most kind of wokish people, Western Europeans, will know these kinds of stories and will be able to empathize to a certain degree with people like you and me by extension. But I think it's a difference of knowing things and having experienced things. I don't know if that's possible to explain. I think maybe Europeans living in the UK now get a first glimpse of an idea with Brexit.
See, I think, yeah, I mean, I agree with you, yeah, they'll get some idea, but it'll still be filtered through this entitlement.
Of course, yeah.
Ness, that's not a word, but yeah, like this privilege of how, like I felt comfortable saying, how dare you do this, once it was about 400 people a week. But I don't think I've ever felt comfortable to say to the Home Office, how dare you do this just for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's then you also detaching yourself from the actual case and fighting for other people. That's easier for you than...
Yeah, I'm just trying to say that I think even if this happens to Europeans, which I think definitely will, like some version of it, I think they will still not understand the type of desperation that comes from not being white.
Yeah, I mean, I can't obviously speak to that. I can only tell the story from being white.
Yeah.
And it was terrifying enough being white. I mean, it will be interesting enough for people to experience a European windrush. I mean, it should be educational for people, I'm sure. But I mean, I don't think it's possible to explain these things. And I still don't think I have fully reached your level of terror related to the Home Office. Like, for example, I never thought immigration officers would actually come to the hospital and take you away.
Really?
I mean, I never thought that would be a thing. I knew that wouldn't happen, or I thought
I mean, you know they've done that, right? They've like literally taken people in from like their beds and into airplanes.
Yeah, they had to be at least, as far as I know, they had to be at least looking like they could walk. I know of cases where people actually died on the flight, even though they took people like doctors with them to make sure they would arrive alive. Unfortunately, I think in a few cases that didn't work. But I mean,
Yeah, so where did you get that feeling of,
well, that must be my white European entitlement, I guess. Like that, of all the sorrows during your weeks of coma, that wasn't one of mine.
Oh wow.
I never went home at night thinking, I hope the immigration officers don't come until I'm coming back the next morning. That never crossed my mind. I was kind of busy thinking you'd die. That was kind of preoccupying my mind to some extent, crazily. Yeah. And even now, I mean, you told me that whenever there's a loud knocking that we don't expect or something at the door, you have like a very pervasive fear that this might be the Home Office in some version, in some shape or form.
Yeah, because
I never had that either.
Yeah, because I don't expect them to do things legally. They're more like, let us see what we can get away with.
Yeah, I know
and
that.
Then respond to it. So I wouldn't be surprised if like I get worried even opening posts that I don't know where it's come from, thinking, why, like, what is in this? Like, is this someone telling me, sorry, like, we were just going through this and we just changed our mind because we don't like you anymore. P.S. we never did.
Yeah, I mean, I share your concern. I mean, we have visas now for both of us because I need one too now, basically. But I share your concern that the government in a year or in 5 years might decide that that whole settled status or any type of visa for that matter might not actually be that good an idea and just send those people away. I can see the clouds at the horizon, and I guess that's part of our life as long as we're in the UK, that we'll never be able to feel entirely safe here. I think that's something that I do feel. Like, it's not like an everyday anxiety, but it is kind of on the horizon that I'm pretty sure that down the line we'll have to fight those same battles all over again, because P.S. we never liked you and we will do whatever we can to get rid of you.
Well,
this time it didn't work, but it might work in 5 years' time.
Yeah, well, I think I would feel a lot safer if, like, the hostile environment policies were taken down, which is like something JCWI and MedAct and even Doctors of the World have been like literally asking the Home Office for like months and months.
Yeah.
Like, I would feel a bit safer if that happened, like at some point in the far, far future, when everyone who is in the government now is probably, I don't know, can't speak to make any changes.
Yeah, I don't see that happening anytime soon. The hostile environment being abolished. That would be too good to be true. I think it's more likely to get worse, to be honest. Because it's now gonna get the Europeans. It's a milder form of it, but over time it's also gonna go for the Europeans.
Yeah, I mean, after the Europeans, it'll be the working class of British people, because they're the ones people at the top hate. Like immigrants, Europeans, working class. So it's always going to be somebody.
Yeah, I guess politics, that's another field.
Yeah, well, I thought it'd be a lot more structured, but anyway, what did we learn?
I guess it's my fault.
No, actually, I think this was good because I think it's quite important for people to know that you were never worried out during the Home Office bits, whereas I was terrified with the Home Office, and you were terrified for the NHS and Home Office, where I wasn't.
I guess my point is I was terrified of the Home Office. I saw a very real possibility, and I think without the media campaign, without this whole thing, I see that it was much more likely that they would have succeeded eventually to get us out of the country than not. But I think the big difference is that I didn't think it would happen in this kind of dramatic, they're coming into the hospital and just kidnapping you into an airplane and goodbye, or knocking at the door with machine guns or anything like that.
Great, now I'm going to think of machine guns every time there's a knock.
Yeah. I think it would have, and that to me is more scary because it's more realistic to me. It would have happened more slowly and more apparently according to the rules, like sending you letters saying in the next 2 weeks you will have to leave, otherwise we could come at any, we'll get you. And then eventually, yes, it would have happened, these kind of knockings at the door without machine guns, but they would have knocked at the door eventually, but that wouldn't have happened without some more correspondence before that would have the air of like some official documents and stuff. I think that's why I wasn't afraid of this, because I kind of knew the Western way of bureaucracy happening beforehand, all of this. I don't think you were at any point of all of this already at the point where they had you on the list of knocking at the door yet. That would have happened, and that's why I was...
If we hadn't paid in money over money to keep the court case going.
It would have happened sooner or later, but we weren't at that point, so I wasn't acutely scared of these knocks now, but I was scared of the same thing as you. down the line. Yeah.
I don't think we really helped anyone with this. I think people are just going to be terrified to
If people are still
speak
watching.
out. Yeah, I think they're going to be terrified to.
Well, I guess, I mean, what I would say, it's reasonable to be terrified of the media. It is a lottery, it can go either way, and we didn't really have any way of knowing which way it would go. I think we were lucky. I think what I would say is to basically get a good lawyer, get a good solicitor is the most important thing you can do.
Yeah, and go with trusted charities through their portal.
Yeah.
Like be it Medact or Migrants Organise or JCWI, because they know the ones who are terrible and good and the ones you need at that particular time, because like Docs Not Cops were amazing during the whole NHS visitor manager person time.
Yeah, definitely.
But
They have the connections. They have the connections for everyone, basically. Like, you don't have to have friends that know friends in the media. I think this is
and
the
media
most...
is not always the answer to it.
No, I guess that's become fairly obvious. No, I mean, that is the thing that everybody can do without exposing themselves, like going to the Joint Council for Welfare of Immigrants.
Yeah.
They have the connections, they can help you, and they are good. Like, we should have done that way earlier than we did, actually. Get in touch with them, I think.
Yeah.
It would have not changed the whole story, but it would have made life easier, quicker for us, I think. Probably. Who knows?
Well, you live and learn.
Yeah.
So cold.